stay inspired. Hey there everybody, how's it going? I hope you are all doing well. Today I just wanted to sort of summarise and talk a little bit about my childhood, and in particular growing up as a military child. My father was a soldier. He was a Scottish soldier in the British Army in the Black Watch Regiment, and I lived many different places in my young life right up till I was 16, 17, and lived in many different houses and many different schools, lots of different friends. And I just want to talk a little bit about that because I've mentioned it many times before. I've mentioned it many times before about being an army child and growing up in the army, but I've never really kind of just spoke about my timeline of growing up in the army. Most childhoods are an adventure, and I think being a military brat, an army brat, or what we were called patch brats within the Black Watch. I don't know many other regiments or forces that called them patch brats, but we were called patch brats, and we had a pretty unique childhood. It was definitely adventurous, that's for sure. It was quite the adventure, and unsettling at times as it may have been. And especially when I look back at it now, it really was unsettling, and it wasn't quite like your average child growing up. I wouldn't change it for the world because it really was an adventure, and I've got stories and memories to tell that I want to share, and I'll share forever. And I wouldn't have had them if my father wasn't a soldier in the army, and I wouldn't change it for the world now because it's made me the person I am, the one that wants to tell stories and share stories and document things and tell stories about growing up, adventures and childhood and coming of age. That's my favourite type of story, and it's quite an adventure and story, that's for sure. And it would be nice having just a settled childhood, same school, same friends, but you know what? I guess you wouldn't know any better. I didn't know any better. That's all I knew was being an army child, being a son of a soldier. That's all I knew. I was born Greg Stott, the 7th of August 1980 in Iserlohn. I was going to say Verrell, but that's where my father was based at the time. I was born in a place called Iserlohn, a town in Germany, West Germany at the time, in 1980, and we lived there till I was like 3 years old, the first 3 years of my life. My younger sister, she was born in 1983, Claire. I'm the oldest of 3, and my sister was born in 1983, and so we lived in Germany, West Germany at the time. I've got visions of being in West Germany. I've got lots of little visions. I even returned. We also lived in Berlin in Germany later in the 80s. We returned to Verrell and the army barracks like a few years later, and I saw things that I recognised that I had in my memories and visions, and I remembered those days. Yeah, so I was born in West Germany, then we moved to Scotland. There was a place called Poulton in West Lothian near Edinburgh, sure it was West Lothian. It was Polton, but it was not far from Edinburgh, that's for sure. And I have memories there. I can't remember how long we were there at all. It could even be 6 months. I don't think it was even more than a year. But we lived there, and there were tough times. Tough times for my mother especially. My father had several tours of Northern Ireland during the Troubles, went to Belfast for 6 months, and including going to Belfast for 6 months when I was just a young toddler. I was a 3-year-old, my sister was a baby, and I had 2 young dogs. It was quite a madhouse. It was tough times for my mother, and I do remember a lot of turbulent times around that period. And I had to grow up. I had to grow up pretty fast. I was pretty mature as a kid growing up, and I think I'm quite a mature adult, but I had to grow up pretty fast, being the older brother, and I was very independent. I'm very independent now, and I was very independent growing up, and I was free to roam much of the time. I remember being in the Polton area for not that long, but I remember facing my first kind of enemies and bullies at that time. There was a kid that lived nearby. His younger brother was about the same age as me, and the older kid, I remember he was a few years older, but he was a real bully, and he seemed huge to me. He seemed so big and scary and intimidating, but I always clashed with him. It was really quite scary, I remember, at the time. I remember the local play park was kind of steel. It was all made of steel, and there was like slides and like a rocket thing and roundabout, swings, whatever. I just remember it was all covered in graffiti. So this is the sort of Scotland of the 80s and mid-80s, working class Scotland of the 80s. It was quite rough. And I just remember this place totally covered in graffiti, and I used to wonder what was being drawn. I knew there was like sort of penises and everything drawn on the park equipment, and I was like, what the hell? I just remember it was covered in graffiti. That's all I remember. And talking of bullies, right, there was this kid that was picking on me as well. I don't know if it was that same one, it was somebody else, and he was picking on me, and I grew up with bullies and enemies all my life, and I always stood up for myself, and I used to hit back harder, and a lot of the times the bullies came off worse. And there was this older kid picking on me, and I obviously hit him back, and he went crying to his mummy, and when she came round the house to my mum complaining about me being my 10-year-old or whatever. I don't know if it was 10-year-old she said, but she obviously thought I was a lot older. I was like 3 or 4, and she said, just battered my son, sort of thing. Well, my son's only 4, and this kid was maybe 7 or 8. But yeah, I had that as well, because I was always tall. I'm not that tall now, I'm just kind of 6 foot tall now, but I've been this sort of height since I was like 14, 15. I stopped growing at 14, 15, and I was always taller than kids my age, like a lot taller and bigger. I'd always struggled with my weight from like 4 or 5 years old as well. It's been a constant battle, and I'm 37 now. So yeah, we're in the Polton area. I remember once also a friend of mine, a girl, I don't even remember her name, we went missing. We just went wandering. I've always been a wanderer. We went wandering, and we just got lost. We were free to our own devices. We got lost, and we came across this gym, and I'm sure these teenagers, older people I don't know if they were adults or teenagers, but they seemed a lot older to me. Like, you know what I mean? Teenagers seemed really big when you're a young kid, and these kids were playing football, and I asked to join in, and I was playing with them, and we were playing football, and just, I don't know what happened, but I guess someone must have called the police, because I was lost. I didn't know where I was. I had no idea where I was. I guess they asked where I was from, and I didn't know my address or nothing. I just have that vision of being picked up by the police and taken to my front door, and then said, "Is this your son?" And yeah, I can't remember the full story. My parents will probably tell you better, my mum especially. But I have visions of that, just being totally lost. I went just wandering. That happened a lot all over my years as a kid. I used to go wandering a lot, especially in those early years. After Polton, we moved to Kirk Newton, which was the other side of Edinburgh, sort of East Lothian, near Livingston, I think Kirk Newton was. Anyway, that's where I started school. That's where I started primary school, Kirk Newton Primary School. I wasn't there very long at all. I don't have that much memories of that school. I remember once our class designed a Christmas tree full of hands. We drew on paper around our hands and we coloured them in green, and then the Christmas tree was made of like our hands, like our the shape of our hands. I remember getting to take that home. I remember we kept it for a while, a few years, and we used to take it out at Christmas, and then we got rid of it, I think, before we left to Berlin, Germany, actually. Kirk Newton, that was my first memories of my old childhood friend Kieran. Kieran lived next door to us. They lived next door to us in Kirk Newton, I remember that. And yeah, I remember playing with him with He-Man figures and Star Wars figures, and he was our next door neighbour. And one of my memories of Kirk Newton as well, I remember down the street, I think it was where my uncle Graham lived and his family and my cousins. I remember the street getting tarmacked. I just remember the first time I ever remember seeing tarmac being tarred, and I remember dreaming of that, right? I remember dreaming of the tarmac, and I thought it must have been near Christmas time or something, and I was dreaming of Santa Claus. And it was my Uncle Graham. In the dream, it was my Uncle Graham dressed as Santa, and he was at the end of the street where the tarmac was. I just remember him just going like this, and it was his face within Santa, and I just remember having that dream in Kirk Newton. So we're probably about 1985 now. I've already lived in 3 different homes and went to my first school, and then we moved to Dreghorn. Dreghorn, that's more in the middle of Edinburgh now. Dreghorn. I don't know if this sort of area is called Dreghorn or the barracks was called Dreghorn, but I always refer to it as Dreghorn. I visited it years ago, back in 2004. I went back to it and I recognised a lot of the area. I went back to beside my old school, which had barely changed at all. But where I used to live, it had been totally sort of redeveloped. A lot of the old 60s, 70s sort of housing and stuff had been kind of torn down. But yeah, Dreghorn I've got lots of memories from Dreghorn, that's for sure, and probably one of the worst experiences at school, my first real proper experience at school of like gangs of bullies, and it was tough. Obviously, as I said, I had a weight problem and I was bigger than most kids, and I just remember gangs of kids just wanting a chase basically from me. And it'd be every break time, every lunch time, and they'd all be calling me fatty, fat bastard, but fatty was the worst one, and they'd run and I'd chase them, and that's all they'd want a chase, and sometimes I'd chase them around the school, sometimes I'd get into conflict, and I'd hit back, and you know, I'd hit them because I'd been attacked, both verbally and physically. I'd get into fist fights, and usually I'd come off as the winner in a fight, and I was always sort of getting into trouble like I was a problem child, and I was labelled as a violent kid, as with psychotic problems, I think, psychological problems. I remember once we got a letter home from school after several times, many times of incidents. I got a letter home from school, and I remember my mother crying. I didn't know what was going on, and it was a letter wanting me to see a psychologist, see a child psychologist. I never saw this child psychologist, so I don't know what sort of help that would have been or whatever, but I think they actually gave me some medication at some point. I don't know what it was, maybe to calm me down or something, I don't know. I think my parents tried me on it. My mum says it made me drowsy, and they never gave me any more. So I don't know if that would have affected me or not. I remember being in the school assembly in the middle of the hall, and I think she was the head teacher, and somebody was annoying me in the assembly. I think he was like poking me in the back or something, and I was telling him to stop it. So I disrupted the whole assembly, and she sort of says, "Greg Stott." He goes, "Yes." He goes, "Oh, I can't wait till you leave this school." This was obviously coming up to a time when we were leaving. He goes, "Oh, I can't wait till you leave this school." You know how that made me feel? You know how that made me feel? It was just awful. But yeah, it wasn't a great experience. It wasn't a great experience at school at all. It was horrible. I remember my school report. I remember reading my school report years later. It described me as intelligent and creative. Intelligent and creative with a good imagination. But I was also a very tall and strong boy for my age. And I used my intelligence and my size to my advantage, and I was often violent towards other children. I was 6 years old. 5 and 6 years old. I was 6 when I left. But I remember that school report describing me as violent. What was I, some kind of psychopath as a 6-year-old? I just remember that. At least they got the intelligent, creative and imaginative right. That was towards the term 1986-87. So we left to Berlin, Germany. I'm not sure if it was like more towards springtime, 1987. I said I was just going to summarise, but I'm starting to kind of storytell a bit more. Yeah, so we moved to Berlin, 1987. I loved Berlin. Some great memories of Berlin. I've got some bad memories of Berlin as well. A lot happened there too. Again, I was getting into fights and stuff from people picking on me, especially in the early days. Maybe not so much. We were only in Berlin 2 years to 1989, but I had some great times, great football times. We had our Black Watch Kids football team, and I loved that. And it was amazing living in Berlin when the Berlin Wall was still there, and we were living in West Berlin, and we'd go and visit East Berlin. We'd go through Checkpoint Charlie, and my father would have to be in his full military gear. He'd be wearing a kilt. And I remember all the Germans thinking it was hilarious that my father was wearing a skirt. Yeah, Berlin, and I returned to Berlin 25 years later with my own family for the 25th anniversary of the Berlin Wall coming down, and it was an amazing experience just being back there. I loved it, and I still miss it. It's a wonderful city, really wonderful city, and a return to my childhood home. And it had barely changed. It was like, and we had the place to ourselves. It was pretty quiet. It was like going back in a time machine. And I'd often visited Berlin many times in my dreams and some of my old childhood homes, and I just remember it being like a time machine, going back in time, and it was really, really affected me emotionally. Berlin's a place I could talk more and more, many different stories, but yeah, we were in Berlin 1987 to 1989. And then we moved to Northern Ireland in 1989. My first stay in Northern Ireland. We lived in Ballykinler, Abercorn Barracks, and went to school at Tyrella Primary School in a little country sort of village outside the barracks, and wasn't there long at all. We weren't there long at all. I don't think we were even there for 10 months. Quite enjoyed it there, but I didn't have the chance to enjoy it too much. We were only there for 9-10 months, as I say. I went on a school trip at the end of term. It was like the end of May 1990. Went on a school trip to Newcastle, not Newcastle in England, but Newcastle in Northern Ireland, near the mountains of Mourne, the Mourne Mountains, and there's a beach there as well. And we had a great sort of week-long trip. Had great fun with my friends. A really good time. But the moment I got back from the trip, my parents were waiting there for me in the car at the school, and there we were, got into the car, driving off, left for Scotland. And I said bye to didn't even say bye to my friends. Didn't even get a chance to say bye to my friends. Most of my friends in the army were staying in Northern Ireland, and we moved to Scotland because my father got posted to the Territorial Army, the TA. He got a job there within the army in Dundee in Scotland. Yeah, so that was the first time I lived in Dundee. I wasn't born in Dundee, I was born in Germany, but my brother was born in Dundee, my mum was born in Dundee, and my own daughter was born in Dundee as well. And I'd call Dundee my hometown now because we've been living there on and off for a long time. And most of my family are from east of Scotland, my father being from Arbroath, mother being from Carnoustie. So we lived in Dundee, moved there in 1990, not long, well, it was May, end of May 1990, just before the World Cup in Italy. So my brother was born. My brother, who's 10 years younger than me, he was born in December 1990. Oh, that was a tough time. That was a tough time at school. I was properly going into, I didn't have any other army kids around me. This was a proper tough civilian school in a working class area, Dundee, and I had like a sort of well-spoken accent. I didn't have an English accent, but these kids thought I was English because I spoke differently from them. A lot of them spoke strong Scottish accents, and I had this kind of Scottish accent, but a lot different, a lot more well-spoken. There might even be an English twang in there because I was around a lot of English kids. So that first year at school was tough. I was in a lot of fights. There was a lot of tension at home. So yeah, I was there, and being back in Scotland, I got to go to a lot of football matches. Like I was a Rangers supporter, Glasgow Rangers supporter growing up, and I went to a lot of football matches and went to see Scotland for the first time. So I've got good memories of going to the football and playing football as well. And my weight was totally fluctuating throughout my childhood, up and down. I was bigger, I got thinner at times, and totally up and down, just like I am in adulthood. And so we were in Dundee for 2 years. 2 years. We left Dundee in, what was it? It was sort of end of term 1992. 1992, because I remember school wasn't finished yet and everybody was getting ready to go to high school. We were all just 11 years old as Canadian geese go past me. So 1992, summer 92, we moved down to England. No, it was kind of April or May, because I remember I had I moved to another school. So we moved to Shropshire. We lived in a place called Turnhill by Market Drayton in Shropshire, and that's close to Telford and not far from Wales. It's kind of up that area, and not far from Stoke. Went to Alton Towers, which is by Stoke. Loved Alton Towers. Anyway, so moved there 1992, and I had a little bit at, what was the school called? The Grove School. So it was Grove. It was like a middle school, first school, where you're kind of, as your first year of high school almost, you're preparing to go to high school. So I went straight into this school from a primary school into a high school, and then we're taking high school classes and everything. And you're just thrown in at the deep. You're just thrown in at the deep end. And I'm like, my God, you have to adjust. You have to adjust to these things. But I was happy. I was back united with all my army friends. So you've got to understand, most of the time, there was a whole massive group of us. We're all army kids. We move about the same area. We move about the same place to place. Apart from, like, when my father was posted to Dundee, or he was posted to little places here and there. You're together. Apart from that, it's tough when you're isolated. But when you're together, you feel like a little family, and it's great to see your friends that you've been growing up with and that you've missed for the last 2 or 3 years. So we were there for a short time. I went to the high school, only for a few months, the main high school for a few months, and so I don't think we were in, I had great times there as well. I was united with my cousins and everything, and some of my close friends, and we played lots of football, always playing football. I love playing football. Oh, for people that don't call it football, soccer. So, yeah, I had some great fun times there, but that was over in a flash. We were barely there 6 months. And then we got news that we were maybe going to Cyprus, or we were maybe going to Germany, but we never ever heard of going to a place called Hong Kong. Oh my. Hong Kong. Hong Kong was a place I always knew from the movies. From martial arts films to kung fu films and to action films, action thrillers. I'd always knew Hong Kong from the movies. I'd seen amazing pictures of this place and wondered, oh wow, what amazing city, what amazing looking place. But the thought to have ever lived there, wow, it just seemed to just come upon us. We're going to Hong Kong. Hong Kong, wow. Yeah, so I remember we left England, we left Shropshire, Turnhill, it must have been about November, December 2000. Oh, 2000? We're getting ahead of ourselves. We must have left Town Hall about November, December 1992, because I remember going back up to Scotland for about, it seemed like a long time, it was maybe a month. We were in Scotland to just before we left to Hong Kong. We were staying with my grandparents and my great-grandparents for a while until we had to go. Yeah, and we travelled down, so we went January 1993, we moved to Hong Kong. And we flew from Manchester. I remember getting together in Manchester, the hotel, a day or two before, and we was reunited with some of my friends there, and we were really excited. And it was a long ass flight, I tell you, on an RAF TriStar to Hong Kong. It was, and there was a couple of stops as well on the way. Yeah, I'd never really experienced proper humidity. I was like, got off the plane in Hong Kong at Kai Tak Airport, which is no longer there. They've got a big, huge international airport now, but Kai Tak Airport, which was a runway that went to the middle of the harbour, in the middle of the city. It was probably one of the most dangerous airports in the world to land. But I remember getting off the plane at Kai Tak Airport and wondering, what was this? You just felt the humidity. It was so humid, and I didn't know what it was. I was like, oh my. It was like going into a steam room. But yeah, I remember it being so humid in Hong Kong. It rained. It didn't rain constantly, but it rained a lot because we had monsoons and typhoons and everything, and there was a lot of rain in Hong Kong with the moisture and the humidity in the air. But I'll definitely speak about Hong Kong many different times and share different tales and stories, and it was just a fantastic time. Really great time. I had great times. My friends, really, many of my fellow military and army friends will agree that was one of our best times of our lives, and I get emotional sort of thinking about it, but it was a great time. And we lived on Hong Kong Island, on the south side of Hong Kong Island, in a place called Stanley, at Stanley Fort Barracks, and we travelled all the way up north to Hong Kong Island, then across the harbour under the Victoria Tunnel at the time into Kowloon on the mainland, which is now mainland China. It wasn't China at the time, it was just Hong Kong. It was still a British colony until we changed over in 1997. So I went to school. It was St George's School, British military school in Kowloon Tong area, and yeah, quite the vast. I'd never been to a school that was so kind of multicultural, and there was Scottish people, there was obviously British people, loads of British Army kids, RAF kids, Navy kids, everything, all different British forces, and there was lots of Southeast Asians, there was Koreans, there was Japanese, there was Indian, there was Chinese, Cantonese, yeah, we had all that, and then we had lots of Nepalese. We had the Gurkha. The Gurkha regiment was obviously part of the British regiment, and they were all Nepalese, and I had lots of Nepalese friends. There was a little rivalry between, somehow, like a tribal rivalry almost, between the Scottish and the Nepalese. It was almost tongue-in-cheek, but there was a bit of tension there at times. But I had lots of great friends. I had lots of friends who were Nepalese, but there was those tensions as well. There was tensions within the school. I think it was a wind-up half the time, but I'm still in touch with many people today. Over the last 10 years or so, since technology and the internet has evolved more and more on social media and stuff, I'm in touch with so many different people from my military days, and I'm in touch with many of my Nepalese friends from those days as well. But yeah, Hong Kong, I'll speak more and more about Hong Kong on maybe separate videos. I'll talk about different places. So we were in Hong Kong till 1994. I think it was. I had my 14th birthday in Hong Kong, 7th of August 1994. I had my 14th birthday in Hong Kong because I remember getting a Discman, like a CD player, a mobile CD player, Discman. I remember getting a Discman, and I wanted a new copy of Nirvana, Nevermind, because my old copy wasn't. I think I might have just had the tape. I don't think I had the CD. No, I did have the CD, but it either got lost or broken. But I remember getting a brand new Nirvana Nevermind CD because I was playing that on my Discman. I remember that. So yeah, it was after August. It might have been September. Maybe it wasn't that long after my birthday that we left. I had one of my best times actually in my last kind of couple of days in Hong Kong. We were staying at an airport hotel beside Kai Tak Airport in Kowloon, Hong Kong, and me, my friend Gary, and Stuart, we just had a bit of a laugh, kind of a bonding session before we said our goodbyes. And because I was saying, like, Gary was moving to England with me, but Stuart was actually moving back to Scotland. He was moving to Scotland, so I remember sort of suddenly saying bye to him at the airport. He was wanting to show me something. I was like, I called him McInnes. McInnes, no, I need to go. The plane's the way to go. And he was like, okay. And it was kind of awkward. Didn't know whether to shake each other's hand or hug or whatever. But I'm like, bye. That's the way it was. That's the way it was in the army days. That's the way it was growing up as a patch brat. Sometimes you'd make amazing friends, and you'd just all of a sudden you'd have to say goodbye to them, and sometimes you'd never see them again, or for years later you might suddenly come across them, but you'll always have the memories. Memories are probably the most wonderful gift that you can give to another person, and we'll always have these memories and stories. Yeah, so 1994 we moved to England, the south of England. Did we fly to Heathrow? Anyway, we lived not far from London. We were living in Surrey. It's kind of awkward. We say it was Purbright Camp, and there's also a little small village beside it called Brookwood, and that's counted as Surrey. And I'm sure Purbright's counted as Hampshire, but never mind. It's all close together, Hampshire, Surrey. So we were 1994 to 96. We were living in Surrey. Went to school in Surrey, Ash Manor, and then that's where I met a bunch of really good friends that were civilians that I still call friends to this day, and they're some of my most loyal friends ever that I made friends there. And that was a tough first year at that school as well. We were army kids. We were these different most of us Scottish kids coming to this English school, quite a rough school, quite some rough people at that school, and I made a lot of enemies. Like, I wasn't out there to pick fights or nothing like that, but we were picked on, in particular me, but also my groups of friends, and I'd stick up for everyone. If no one else is going to stick up for my friends, I have to step up to the plate, and I'd stick up for friends, and that's what made an enemy out of me about most people, because I was sticking up for people, and I think we came with all of a sudden a reputation or something that we're fighters or something. But I had a tough first year, a really tough first year, and nowadays, 2018, there's so much mental health awareness at school, and there was nothing of that in the 80s and 90s, and I was going through such a horrible time mentally. I didn't know what I was going through. I didn't know I was suffering from anxiety or depression or stress or anything like that. I just felt that you had to just deal with it on your own. That was it. Yeah, that first year was really, really tough. I made lots of enemies, and I was very nervous and scared going into school most days. But yeah, I made great friends. I made great English friends. And I got my first job in summer. Well, I had a small job as a dishwasher one day. I washed dishes for one day just to try it, because everybody else was doing it. I thought I'd just try it, get some money. Oh, it was horrible. Hated it. I wasn't very good at it either, and I lasted one day. But then my first real proper job was in the summer, and I was only 15, coming up for 16. But I remember having the interview. I did well at the interview, and then the manager told me, right, here's the news. Here's the most important news. Here's the money. He goes, it's £2 an hour. He goes, I'll understand if you walk away now. I'm like, do you want the job? I goes, yeah. I'm like, £2 an hour? I'm getting £2 every hour. Yeah. So I got the job, and I worked there. And that was during the summer of Euro 96, the European Football Championships in England, and that was a great summer. England played Scotland, although we lost, but England were drawn together in Scotland in the group, England being the host nation, wonderful atmosphere at Wembley Stadium, and we played Holland at Villa Park, and then Switzerland at Villa Park in the last game. And yeah, there was a great atmosphere about England at that time, Britain about that time, and it was the introduction of Britpop bands like Oasis and Pulp and Cast and Suede and Shed 7 and it's just I mean, Britpop. It was Blur, and it was just a great time, great music. It was just a great time to be alive and be a teenager coming of age, and it was a great music at that time. And summer of '96 for that was great, although a close family member, Shelley, died in a fire. She died in a fire, sadly, that summer as well. So it was also a really traumatic and sad summer too. Mixed emotions, of course, but that was sad. I remember looking out my window because I smelt smoke and I seen fire engines going along towards their house, and then we went out and Shelley was taken out in the ambulance, and that's something to talk about another day. Summer '96, that was a fun summer mostly, and I worked in JJB Sport. I didn't say where I worked. It was JJB Sports. JJB Sports in the Peacock Shopping Mall in Woking in Surrey. That was my first job. I thought it was great fun. Yeah, it was different. It was a different thing for me to do, working all day. But yeah, JGB Sports, so I had fun there. I made some friends there at the time. I've never seen one person again that was there. It's amazing. You made some friends, whatever, and you never see them ever again. Because there you go, you're gone. Because I probably would have kept that job. I probably would have kept that job at the weekends or whatever. But yeah, I never ever heard or seen, I don't even remember anyone's name from that time. Like their full names or nothing like that. So, never seen any of them again. So, summer 1996. After summer 96, my father got posted. Everyone else was going, most people were going up to Inverness in Scotland. That would have been great. I love Inverness. I love the area around there. I went to visit a couple of times when my friends were there from Northern Ireland and from Scotland. Yeah, they all moved to Inverness and we went back over to Northern Ireland. So the Troubles were still going on, and we moved to a place called Lisburn, which is now a city just outside of Belfast in Northern Ireland. And yeah, my father was at the headquarters of Northern Ireland in Thiepval Barracks. And I remember it must have been within a month we were there, my father's office was actually blown up and there was a few people injured. One man died, and it was a IRA bomb that had bombed up the camp, and the whole headquarters had been blown to pieces, and that was our introduction back to Northern Ireland. I got a book, at the end of term of school in England, we all had books, and I had this jotter that I got loads of friends to sort of write me letters or write their addresses or just write a note to say bye or whatever. And one of my old friends, Liam, said, I hope you get blowed up by the IRA, you Scottish bastard. Blowed up, whatever. But he said blowed up, BLOWED. I hope you get blowed up by the IRA, you Scottish bastard. I'm like, cheers. He was joking, obviously, but holy shit. And then that happens, our first month there. But yeah, that's people don't understand Scottish and English. There is that rivalry, Scottish and English, and those Southerners in England, they like to look down their nose at us Northerners, not just in Scotland but also the north of England as well. There's a clear divide. Yeah, so we moved to Northern Ireland. I didn't know what I was doing. I was good at English. I was good at English at school, and English literature was my best subject that I was good at, and I quite enjoyed it as well. I liked reading, I liked writing, I enjoyed books, and that was my best subject. And I remember wanting to write short stories. I enjoyed writing little short stories. I remember speaking to a careers advisor, and she recommended that I become a journalist. Because have you ever thought about being a journalist? I'm like, and then I goes, what's a journalist? And she told me. I'm like, oh yeah. So I moved to Northern Ireland, and I was talking about I wanted to go to college to do a media studies course. Because I turned 16 after 31st of July, I turned 16 on 7th of August 1996, I was too young to start college. They wouldn't let me go to college. So I was like, okay, what's my option? Went to the local high school, and there was a sixth form class, right? That's the last year, the sixth form class, and then the only option was to study like a BTEC course, a GNVQ level 3 General National Vocational Qualification in Business Studies. So I'm like, business studies? I'm like, alright, I've heard of that before. And you know what, I found it really interesting, business studies. I I'm quite interested in business studies, and it was interesting to do. But I didn't get to go and do that course that I wanted straight away. That's what it was like being in the army. It's like you just get thrown into the situation. I'm like, okay, go on, go to class, go and make friends. Yes, I had fun times there in Northern Ireland. 1996 to 97. I was there barely a year, not even a year, and I played in a football team. I was really enjoying football at that time. And I was just getting settled into playing football with my teammates, and then all of a sudden we were gone again. Oh, by the way, I had another job working at McDonald's part-time as well when I was 16 in Ireland, Northern Ireland. Me and Daniel had a laugh doing it, but it was something to earn us money and pass the time. But yeah, finally we moved back to Scotland. My father got a good job as, was he Regimental Sergeant Major, and he got a job in Perth initially, and then we moved into an army house in Dundee on the Perth Road. We were there for not even a year, and then we moved to the house where my parents are actually living now. In 1998 I turned 18, and they're in the house now in Dundee where we moved in 1998, and that was me in Dundee. I've been calling Dundee my hometown on and off since 1997, so over 20 years now. Dundee's my family's kind of hometown, and my father was working at the University Officer Training Corps with students that were maybe joining the army, joining the military as well, and he got out in sort of early 2000s, 2001, 2002, and that's my brief sort of timeline and summary of where I lived in the army. I lived all over the UK, including Northern Ireland, England, Scotland, Germany and Hong Kong, and I lived in all these places right up. By the time I was 16 I lived in all these different places, and I wouldn't change it for the world, and I wouldn't change it. It was very unsettling at times, and I think my head's a little messed up because of a lot of the stuff that's went on, but it's allowed me to become the storyteller that I am now, and I can't wait to share more stories with you in the future. And if you're an army kid, or if you were a military kid, tell me, and share some of your experiences with me. And I hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll speak again soon, okay?
Well, the pain keeps coming, but there's no knowing as the darkness kicks in. Your life filled with regret, your dreams taken from you, your hopes may fade away. Close your eyes and drift to silence. You think of better days, 'cause we're running out on our youth, 'cause we're searching for a cure. When the mind